They say time softens grief. But as the black car turned up the long gravel road to my father's estate, I realized time hadn't softened anything, it had only buried the pain under thicker layers of silence. The house looked the same as it did 10 years ago. Grand. Cold. Untouched by warmth or welcome. Only the ivy creeping higher up the stone walls seemed alive, like it had been waiting to swallow the place whole. I hadn't been home since the night everything fell apart. Since the night I was told to leave, because I'd shamed the family. Back then, I'd walked out with a single suitcase and a heart full of fury. I'd built a life far away, one my father never saw, one my brother never acknowledged. And yet, when the funeral invitation came in that stiff, gold-edged envelope, I couldn't stay away. Because no matter how deep the wound, a daughter always returns for her father's last goodbye. The church was already half full when I arrived. Rows of familiar faces, lawyers, business partners, old money wives with pearls for smiles. And there, at the front row, stood my brother, Caleb. Perfectly composed. Perfectly pressed. Perfectly fake. He'd always been the golden one. The heir. The prodigy. The one who never got his hands dirty, because someone else always cleaned up after him. Usually me. As the priest spoke, I didn't hear the words. I just stared at the mahogany coffin and felt this strange detachment, like I was watching someone else's story unfold. When it was time to approach, I walked down the aisle slowly, feeling every pair of eyes track my steps. I could almost hear the whispers. She came back? After what happened? I placed a white rose on the coffin and whispered. Goodbye, Dad. You deserved better than the people who surrounded you. After the ceremony, the family gathered in the grand hall of the estate for the reception. The chandelier still glimmered with that same cold brilliance. The portraits of our ancestors still watched from the walls, proud, judgmental, lifeless. Caleb spotted me across the room and came over, drink in hand, that practiced charm plastered across his face. You look well, Eliza, he said. I didn't think you'd come. I smiled faintly. Neither did I. The air between us was tight, polite, but sharp. We traded empty words until he excused himself to speak to the lawyers. And that's when I heard it, one of the guests whispering nearby. It's sad, really. He left everything to Caleb. She's not even mentioned in the will. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted the money. But because, deep down, I knew my father would never have cut me out, not completely. He was stern, yes. Distant. But cruel? No. And something in Caleb's easy confidence told me there was more to the story than anyone dared to say aloud. That night, I stayed in one of the guest rooms. The house creaked the same way it used to when the wind hit the glass just right. And as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that my return wasn't just about grief, it was about unfinished business. Because some ghosts don't haunt you for revenge. They haunt you for justice. Morning came cloaked in fog, the kind that made the estate feel like it existed outside of time. I dressed in silence, the weight of last night's whispers still pressing behind my ribs. Downstairs, the staff were moving about, preparing breakfast for the family. Most of them avoided my eyes. A few offered small, sad smiles, the kind you give to someone you pity. Caleb was already at the head of the table when I entered. He was on the phone, his tone all business. Even in mourning, he managed the empire, the company his father had built from the ground up. When he noticed me, he gestured to the seat across from him. Coffee, he offered, like we were strangers meeting for a polite interview. I sat, studying him as he talked about mergers and transfers of control. He sounded confident. Too confident. especially for someone whose father had died less than a week ago. When he hung up, he gave me a look I knew too well, the kind that meant I already owned this room. "The lawyers will read the will tomorrow," he said. "Dad wanted it handled privately." "Privately," I repeated. "Meaning without me?" He smiled thinly. "Meaning without unnecessary drama. You've had your fair share of that." There it was, the dig. The reminder of the scandal that drove me away. He wanted to see if I'd react. But I didn't. I'd learned to play calm better than he ever could. After breakfast, I wandered the halls. The paintings, the marble floors, the faint scent of my father's cologne still clinging to the air, all of it felt like a museum built to preserve appearances. And then, I passed his study. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. It was untouched. The same mahogany desk. The same shelves of leather-bound books. And, on the far wall, a photo of Caleb and my father shaking hands, the perfect heir sealing his legacy. But my father's eyes in that picture, they didn't look proud. They looked tired. I almost resigned. As I stepped inside, a chill crawled up my spine. This room had always been off-limits when he was alive. And yet, being there now felt like stepping into the only honest part of the house. There were files stacked neatly on the desk, estate documents, investment reports, everything labeled in my father's handwriting. Except one folder. A plain black one, tucked half under a ledger, with no label at all. I reached for it. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway. I froze. Caleb's voice. Low, clipped. Talking to someone, the family lawyer, I realized. "We'll keep it simple," he said. "No need to involve Eliza. She has no legal standing anymore." My pulse quickened. I stepped back from the desk, keeping silent until their voices faded down the corridor. Something was wrong. I could feel it now, like static in the air. Whatever Caleb was hiding, he was confident I'd never find it. And that was his first mistake, assuming I hadn't learned to look beneath the surface. I waited until the house was quiet that night. Then I returned to the study with a flashlight and the kind of resolve that only comes from being underestimated too many times. I started with the black folder. Empty. Almost too deliberately empty. So I looked elsewhere, in drawers, on bookshelves, and behind framed photos. Nothing. Until I noticed something odd. One of the floorboards beneath the desk wasn't aligned perfectly. When I pressed it, it shifted, just slightly. Enough for me to pry it open. And beneath it, a small, metal lockbox. Dusty. Heavy. The kind of thing that didn't exist unless it held something worth hiding. I lifted it out carefully, heart pounding, and set it on the desk. There was no key, but my father had always kept a spare in his globe. Sure enough, inside the tiny compartment of the globe's base was a silver key. I turned it in the lock. It clicked open. Inside were letters. A few documents. And one envelope marked only with 2 words in my father's handwriting. For Eliza. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting, my father's, uneven and strained, like it had been written in his final days. "If you're reading this, Eliza, then the truth is no longer mine to protect." I froze. The words bled with guilt. He went on. "Your brother believes legacy is measured in power. But I built this family's wealth on trust that's long been broken. I made a mistake giving him control. You were right to walk away." My throat tightened. I kept reading, line after line. The will he will present isn't mine. He and Lillian forged it after my first stroke. The original remains where I left it, behind the portrait of your mother in this study. Use it if you must, but not for revenge. For truth. I stared at the letter. The words forged will echo like thunder inside me. For years, Caleb had painted me as the reckless one, the family disgrace. But it was him. He'd rewritten our father's legacy, and erased me in the process. I turned toward the portrait, my mother's face serene, painted decades ago, eyes soft and knowing. I lifted it from the wall, and sure enough, behind it was a slim, sealed envelope stamped with the family attorney's insignia. When I pulled it free, dust spiraled through the air like ghosts. The seal was unbroken. I opened it. The real will. Hand-signed. Notarized. Dated months before my father's first stroke. And in it, clear as daylight, I was not only reinstated. I was named successor to our family's philanthropic foundation, the one Caleb had claimed he was entrusted to expand. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in the wood-paneled walls. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen an identity. He'd erased my name from every record, every conversation, every piece of our history that didn't fit his image. I sat there for a long time, the letter in one hand, the will in the other. Part of me wanted to burn them both. To walk away again, pretend none of it mattered. But then I thought about the people who'd believed his version of me, the distant cousin who whispered that I'd self-destructed, the board members who nodded in pity when my name came up. And I realized something. This wasn't just about money. It was about truth. And truth, when revealed in the right light, could burn brighter than vengeance ever could. By the time morning came, I had a plan. The will reading would happen that afternoon in the main drawing room, private, as Caleb had insisted. He'd invited the board of directors, the attorney, and a handful of distant relatives, enough witnesses to make it feel official, but not public enough for scandal. Perfect. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from my brother, it's that exposure hurts more when it's unexpected, and when it comes from someone you dismissed as powerless. As I sealed my father's letter back into the envelope and tucked it into my bag, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the study window. For the first time in years, I didn't see the family's disappointment staring back. I saw calm. Control. And maybe, just maybe, justice waiting to speak through me. The next afternoon, the estate was dressed for power. Crystal decanters, velvet curtains, the faint scent of cigars that hadn't been lit yet. Every seat in that drawing room had been chosen to make someone feel smaller, except for the one at the head of the table. And, of course, that's where Caleb sat. He looked every inch the heir. Dark suit, watch gleaming, his voice smooth as he greeted the guests. The family lawyer, Mr. Price, sat beside him, papers neatly stacked in front of him, one of which I knew was a forgery. When I walked in, the conversation paused just long enough for the tension to register. Some people looked away. Others smirked, like they were watching a scandal about to unfold. Caleb stood. "Eliza," he said, feigning warmth. "Glad you decided to join us. I wasn't sure if you'd still consider yourself part of this family's affairs." I met his gaze and smiled politely. I figured I should be here. After all, family matters, doesn't it? He chuckled softly and gestured toward a chair. Of course. Please, sit. Mr. Price cleared his throat and began reading. His tone was monotone, detached, legal procedure dressed up as formality. According to that will, my father's estate, properties, businesses, and all assets went solely to Caleb. I, apparently, was left a modest trust as a gesture of goodwill. I let the words hang in the air. The others nodded politely, as though this was expected. And Caleb, oh, he looked so smug. When the reading ended, he leaned back, exhaled, and said quietly, "I know this isn't easy for you, Eliza. But it's what Father wanted. Closure, finally. Closure." That word broke something in me, not in anger, but clarity. I rose from my seat slowly. "You're right," I said. "It is closure. Just not the kind you think." All eyes turned toward me. My voice stayed calm, too calm, maybe, the kind that made people nervous. "Mr. Price," I said, "would you mind confirming when that will was signed?" He flipped through the papers. "According to this, 2 months after your father's stroke." "Interesting," I said. "Because, according to his doctor's report, he couldn't sign anything with his right hand at that time." A murmur rippled through the room. Caleb's smile faltered for the first time. "Eliza," he said tightly, "I think you've made your point." "Oh, I'm just getting started." I reached into my bag and placed the sealed envelope on the table. "This is the real will. The one he signed before the stroke. I found it where he said I would, behind Mother's portrait. And unlike the one you presented, it's notarized by the family's longtime attorney, not the one you replaced." The silence was deafening. Even the chandelier seemed to stop flickering. Mr. Price looked pale as he examined the seal. Then he whispered, This appears legitimate." Caleb tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Eliza. You expect anyone to believe you just found a will? How convenient." I met his eyes. Convenient? Maybe. But not as convenient as forging a new one and cutting out every record of the old attorney from Father's archives. "You weren't careful enough, Caleb. You left traces." I slid my phone across the table. A recording played, one I'd made the night before, when I discovered my father's hidden letter. His faint voice filled the room, trembling but clear. "If you're reading this, Eliza, then the truth is no longer mine to protect. Your brother forged my will." Gasps. Aunt Margaret actually clutched her pearls. And Caleb, his color drained entirely. He lunged for the phone, but Mr. Price blocked him. "Mr. Stanton," the lawyer said quietly, "this is serious. I'll have to verify this immediately." I turned to the room, all the faces that had once turned away from me. "I didn't come here for money," I said. "I came here for the truth. For years, you believed his story, that I was the failure, the disappointment, the ungrateful daughter. But the truth is, I walked away to protect myself from the very corruption you just heard. My father built this family on integrity. Caleb built it on lies. And I think it's time this family decided which legacy it wants to live under." No one spoke. Even the air felt different, heavier, clearer. Mr. Price gathered the documents slowly, almost reverently. "This will be investigated," he said. "If this will is proven valid, Miss Stanton, you are the rightful heir to the foundation." I nodded. Then my father's legacy can finally rest in peace. Caleb tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. One by one, the guests began to leave. Some shook my hand quietly. Some couldn't meet my eyes. But they all knew. By the time the room emptied, Caleb stood alone in the fading light, looking small for the first time in his life. "You think you've won," he muttered. I turned toward him. "No, Caleb. I think Father finally has." And with that, I walked out, not in triumph, not in rage, but in peace. Because sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the truth that was stolen from you, and letting it speak for itself.